You ready? I'm Rabbi Yochanan.
Here's a quick question.
Yeah.
When it says generally speaking, bifnim, when we're learning here,
Yeah.
is it talking about It's talking about in the heichal, or it's talking in the heichal, right?
Well, it's a relative word. It could mean, sometimes it means in the heichal, sometimes it means in the Beis Hamikdash. It depends what it's referring to.
Okay. Well,
Over here, it's referring to in the Beis Hamikdash, as opposed to in the heichal, because it's comparing it to chutz. Chutz means outside the Beis Hamikdash.
Okay.
I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan tells us the halacha. Are you okay with the Hebrew?
Not really. But that doesn't matter.
So maybe share together.
Okay.
Hasheichet behema balayla b'fnim. If someone shechs an animal in the evening inside the Beis Hamikdash, now the location is perfect, but the timing is off. So, and then he goes outside the Beis Hamikdash, vehelen bachutz, and he brings it up on an altar outside the temple. Now, there's a prohibition to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. Now, the only thing is that the only time you would violate this prohibition is if it was a valid sacrifice. But because this sacrifice was slaughtered by night, it was already invalid, so maybe he should be exempt from bringing it outside because it wasn't a valid sacrifice. You need to
just be chayav for the one of them. Well, he'll just be chayav for offering something outside
Yeah,
the
but
base
that's
but not
no.
for.
What we're
doing
trying
it
to
off
say
the-
is that there's a possibility that he shouldn't be chayav for taking it outside the Beis Hamikdash because it was totally invalid beforehand.
Okay.
He slaughtered it by night.
So you're
because
using
it was
that.
done by night, that would make it invalid to the extent that now when he takes it outside the temple, what he did was nothing outside the temple. He just took an animal. It wasn't a sacrifice because it was invalid already because of the timing. Yeah. However, Rabbi Yochanan says that no, he's chayav. It's considered an acceptable sacrifice, and therefore he's obligated. He's responsible for what he did outside the temple, which is a severe, serious prohibition.
How does Rabbi
He's
Yochanan?
chayav kares.
How does Rabbi Yochanan say such a thing?
We're going to see. He's chayav, even though it was originally slaughtered by night. He says, "Leitei b'chusim yishaychet b'chutz u'mayla b'chutz." Look, how do you make a sacrifice invalid? There's all these different types of ways. But let's say you slaughtered a sacrifice outside the temple. That's also invalid. And then let's say you then take this invalid sacrifice and you bring it up on an altar outside the temple. So what did you bring up on the altar outside the temple? An invalid sacrifice because you slaughtered it outside the temple. But you're still chayiv. So the fact that I slaughtered it by night in the temple should be no worse than if I slaughtered it outside the temple and brought it up outside the temple. That was also invalid, but nevertheless you're chayiv. So slaughtering it inside by night should be no worse than slaughtering it outside the temple. The wrong time should be no worse than and nevertheless I should be chayiv. Masav Reb Chia Barav, and Reb Chia Barav asked the question, a bird needs to be slaughtered with the fingernail, with malika, right? You pierce the neck with the fingernail. So if someone, instead of doing that, he shechts the bird, means he uses a knife. So that's invalid. Umala bachutz. But then he goes ahead and he offers it outside the temple. He's pater. He's exempt. Why? Because it was invalid. You started this off the sacrifice with shchita instead of malika. However, shachat bachutz umala bachutz. Let's say he would have taken the bird outside the temple, and he would have slaughtered it there, and he would have brought it up on an altar there. He would have been chayiv. So let's say, Neima, shall we say, we should say, leitei b'chusim yishaychet umala bachutz. It should not be any worse than slaughtering it outside the temple, which is also an invalidation. He's doing one thing wrong here by slaughtering the bird instead of making an incision with his fingernail. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And we said that if you then take it outside and you offer it outside, we said the rule was that he was pater, because you started off the sacrifice in the invalid way. You started with shchita instead of malika. So now when you offer it outside, you're not offering a sacrifice. It's invalid. So we say, let's compare it to slaughtering it outside the temple. If you slaughter it outside the temple, and then you bring it up outside the temple, you're chayiv. So why is slaughtering it inside the temple more of an invalidation than slaughtering it outside the temple? You're not allowed to slaughter it outside the temple either. And we're comparing it back to Rabbi Yochanan's case, where Rabbi Yochanan said that if you slaughter it by night, and then you offer it outside the temple, you're chayiv, because it shouldn't be any worse than slaughtering it outside the temple and offering it outside the temple.
Right.
Now we have another case where we don't make that comparison. We say that slaughtering the bird in the temple and then offering it outside is pater. Why is that any worse than slaughtering it outside the temple and offering it outside the temple where you would be chayiv? So the Gemara gives us the famous word, tiyufta. It's a good question. Tiyufta means it's rejected.
Oh.
Okay. The Hebrew shin gets exchanged for an Aramaic taf. So it's really like shiyuv, which means that we have to return this. Or it could also mean a question. Yeah, it's a question. It means this is a question.
But it's not like a teku where it's going to be answered when Mashiach comes. It's a different.
No, it's
question.
worse. It's worse. A teku.
You have an
A
answer.
teku is when we don't know how to. We have two sides. Should we do it like this or should we do it like that? Teku, you have to leave it. We can't resolve it. Tiyufta is when we were told what to do, but we have such a strong problem with it that it doesn't make sense. So we say tiyufta. We have to remove that. Now, who is the halacha like? Apparently, it's the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan. Iba yesema. Maybe because there's another answer. If you want, I could say shchita saif b'fnim mikdal katle. Slaughtering the bird inside the temple is not considered a slaughtering. It's just considered killing it. And so therefore, this sacrifice, this bird, was not even considered a sacrifice. It was just killed. It was like strangled or something. You slaughtered it. Birds in the temple need malika. There's no such thing as slaughtering a bird in the temple. It's never done. So therefore, this bird wasn't a real sacrifice. The other case, Rabbi Yochanan's case, was an animal that was slaughtered by night. So slaughtering was a good slaughtering. It just the timing was off. So we say that that's valid. And
What's valid? The slaughtering?
The slaughtering by night is valid enough that if you should then take it outside the temple and offer it, it's considered a real sacrifice, and he offered it outside the temple. He's chayiv kares.
That's interesting. So it is so a carbon. I'm sorry, just to understand this. A carbon that's bought shalei bismanai, that's not in the wrong time, which
is still considered a sacrifice to make him chayiv bachutz and all of those other things.
Well, meaning he's chayiv.
Right.
He's chayiv
for bringing it outside the temple.
Time. No, what about?
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about bringing it outside the temple.
Okay.
Chayiv kares.
Okay, fine.
Chayiv kares to bring it outside the temple.
It's not going to be a valid sacrifice because of the timing was wrong.
Right.
That's
But
what
it's
I'm
valid
trying to say.
enough that it's
Like he pays the penalty, but he never gets the benefit of it.
right.
But he's bringing something outside that was slaughtered in the wrong time inside.
Yeah, slaughtered
Outside.
properly.
Right.
It's
So
slaughtered
he's-
properly.
It's.
Slaughtered properly. I mean,
But,
it's-
no, I'm saying the fact that he didn't do it in the right
Right
time,
time, right.
doesn't take away.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
He's really setting himself up. So he gets to pay the penalty, but he never would have gotten the benefit from it.
Right.
It's not sounds
Right.
unfair, but that's Jewish.
Right.
Maybe.
Interesting.
He couldn't get any benefit from it. And the bird thing, it's there's no benefit from it anyway because he just strangled it.
Right.
It's like a dog. You might as well throw a dog somewhere.
Right.
Right.
I don't know if we have something comparable to this in secular law, where someone would do something. You know, let's say a child is driving a car and he's speeding, So he's not going to be able to say, it's not considered like I'm driving because I'm underage, so you can't count the speed. We wouldn't have that.
I don't have a license, right?
You get two violations.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know of a good example, but we're using such a type of logic to say it's not considered like you brought a sacrifice outside the temple because it was at the wrong time or because it was slaughtered instead of malika. So, okay. Amar Ula, it's a new Gemara. Ula says,
It's like juvenile stuff. If you can't get tried as an adult if you're a juvenile.
So there could be examples.
Well, like if you're 15 and you do something, you commit a
yeah, or whatever
crime.
they do. I mean, certain crimes.
Is that a
if
good
you're
analogy though to this though?
Maybe.
Okay, Amar Ula.
Okay.
Ula went back and forth, right? He was the one that
Ula did travel back and forth. Yes, they called nechuse. They would bring halachas from Imuri Kachim Kalim. Okay, the way it works is that there's certain sacrifices. For example, a shlamim. What are you going to do? You want to share?
kept- no?
Peanut butter cookies.
There are certain
After.
sacrifices, kachim kalim. There's of secondary holiness, of lighter. It's lighter holiness, and then there's the holy of holiness, kachim, and then it's kachim kalim. So, for example, a shlamim is kachim kalim. It's lighter holiness. Now the rule is that until the blood is sprinkled of one of these sacrifices, it's not considered. The sacrifice itself is not considered holy enough that if someone would have benefit from it, it would be a violation of having benefit from something that's sanctified. So in other words, only after the blood is sprinkled does it get that status of me'ila. You've had benefit from temple things. So here, Emuri kachim kalim shehelam fnei zrikas daman. The limbs of the kachim kalim sacrifice that were brought on the altar before the blood was sprinkled. So the problem is that it never attained the status of holiness that me'ila should happen to it, because it's still at a lower level of holiness. So you brought it up on it's undeserving to be on the altar. It's not at the right level yet. However, nevertheless, la-yer, you don't take it off. The blood wasn't sprinkled yet. They put the organs on the altar. You don't take it down. Nasilach mishal mizbeach, it becomes the food of the altar. Rab Zera says, Afananami Tanina. We also learned this. Usually Tanina means a Mishnah, but here it means a Brisa. We also learned this in a Brisa. There's always exceptions to the rules. It says, Shenishbach dama, if the blood of a sacrifice spilled, Vishayatza dama chutz l'klaim, or the blood left the enclosure of the temple, and the sacrifice was put on the altar, you don't take it off. So we have a case of the blood was spilt. Ma hasam, just as there, dimbal lizrik, that if he would want to sprinkle the blood, ein le lizrik, he doesn't have blood to sprinkle. But amrit imalo lo yerdu, we said that if you put it up on the altar, you don't take it down. Hacha here, the imbal lizrik zayrek, that if you wanted to sprinkle, you could sprinkle. You just put it up too early. You didn't sprinkle the blood yet, but you still have the blood. Like kolshkein, is it not an all the more so that it should be valid? Now,
In other words, if you still have the blood.
you still have the blood.
Versus it going down the drain.
Right. And when it went down the drain, when you spilt the blood, it was, if the sacrifice was put on the altar, you don't take it off. So here also, you put it on the altar, you didn't sprinkle the blood yet, you don't take it off.
Right.
Over there it's worse. Over there you don't even have the blood even if you wanted to.
Right.
There's such a logic that anything that you're able to do, even if you didn't do it, it still should be good because you were able to do it.
Right.
Over here you're able to do it, so in a way it's better.
Post facto, you should be like
It should stay on the altar.
Okay.
Now, many times when there's a statement from an Amira, and then we have a Mishnah or a Brisa that says it, the Gemara has a question. Why do I need you to say it? I already have it in a Mishnah. Over here we're not doing that. Over here we're saying, Afananami Tanina, I even learned it in a Mishnah. That means we're validating what he said. And the reason is because the Mishnah is not so clear. Why is it not so clear? It seems exactly the same case, that you didn't sprinkle the blood and you put it on the altar. The Gemara says it's not exactly accurate, Tirgama, because we can translate the Mishnah, Akachi Kachim. This sacrifice that the blood spilled was a type of sacrifice that it was holy of holies. It doesn't need the blood to be sprinkled for it to attain the holiness. It starts off holy. Ula was talking about a sacrifice that's kachim kalim, lower of lesser holiness. Until the blood is sprinkled, it doesn't have the level of holiness, and you put it on the altar, and Ula says you don't take it off. The Mishnah may be talking about where the blood was spilled, but it was kachi kachim, where it starts off at a holy level, and that's why when it's put on the altar, you don't take it off. The Gemara asks, but if you finish that brisa, it talks about a korban pesach that was brought shalei lishma, a pesach that was brought for the wrong intention. If you put it on the altar, you don't take it off. Hare pesach the kachim kalim ho. Pesach is kachim kalim. So how could you tell me that brisa is kachi kachim, and that's why you don't take it off the altar? The conclusion of that brisa is about a korban pesach that was brought for the wrong intention, and that's kachim kalim. So it's exactly what Ula said. So tirgama b'shalei lishman. You have to translate that brisa that says that discusses a korban pesach, not that a korban pesach was the discussion of the entire brisa. The korban pesach is only the very last case, which over there we said that it was brought shalei lishma. But the first cases of the brisa where we said that the blood was spilled, that was kachi kachim. It was just because the final case of the brisa was talking about a korban pesach that was brought shalei lishma, doesn't mean the entire brisa was talking about a korban pesach. Really, yes, the korban pesach is mentioned in that brisa, but under a different topic, talking about when it was brought shalei lishma. But the case of the blood was spilled, that's kachi kachim. Okay. Tanan, it's taught in the Mishnah. This is our Mishnah. All of them that were brought up on the altar. On the Mizbeach, they were brought up on the altar while they were alive. Yerdu, you take them off the altar. Ha shchutim, but if they would be slaughtered, la yerdu, you don't take it off the altar. Now, once they're slaughtered, that means that the blood wasn't sprinkled yet. They were just slaughtered before. We said if it's alive, you don't take it off. But if it's slaughtered, if it's alive, you do take it off.
Yeah.
But if it's slaughtered, you don't take it off. That means that the blood wasn't sprinkled yet, and you leave it on the altar. This is a clear Mishnah that agrees with Ula, that sacrifice that the blood wasn't sprinkled, Kachin Kalim was more specific, Ula was talking about, that you don't take it off the altar. Here you have a proof. We deduce, it doesn't state it, but we can understand that from what it says. It says that if it's alive, you don't take it off. If it's alive, you take it off. But if it's slaughtered, you don't take it off.
Why would he say this first?
You may ask the first proof?
Yeah. In other words, use this first. Instead
Well, the
of
other one was
stronger.
the blood was spilled. It was pretty clear. There was no blood.
Oh, right, okay.
It could be. My love, is it not? Leishna kachi kachim. Whether it's holy of holy sacrifice, leishna kachim kalim, whether it's of secondary, of lesser holiness, of lighter holiness, in either case, you don't take it off the altar. That's a proof to Ula. The Gemara says, Lai. Nope, that's not the case. Hashchutim, but if it was slaughtered, in other words, what will we deduce from this? We'll say that if it's alive, you take it off the altar. But if it was slaughtered, mehem yerdu, mehem la yerdu. Sometimes you're gonna take it off. Sometimes you're gonna leave it on. Because if it's alive, you always take it off. But if it was slaughtered, sometimes you're gonna leave it on. When will you leave it on? If it's kachi kachim. But kachim kalim, you're gonna take it off, which means that this Mishnah does not agree with Ula. The Gemara says v'ha kulan ktani. It says all of them that are put on the altar when they're alive, you take it off. That means that all of them, when they're not alive, you leave them on. That would mean that even kachim kalim, you're going to leave it on. It says no, kulan achayim. All of them, when they're alive, you take them off. But it doesn't mean all of them after they're shechted, you leave them on. The Gemara says pshita. if there's no no chiddush, you're not telling me anything. All you're telling me is that if it goes on the altar alive, you take it off, but I can't deduce anything from it. So why do you have to tell me anything? If it's a kosher animal that went on the altar alive, you take it down, you slaughter it on the bottom, off the altar, and then you bring it back up. There's no chiddush here. So it says, Loila machayim abedukin shabayim v'alibud Rabbi Akiva da'amar imalo lo yardu. Actually, we're talking about a sacrifice that was invalid. Even while it was alive, it was invalid. Why? Because it had a slit in the eye, on the eyelid. And the rule is that this is considered a mum. However, Rabbi Akiva holds that this is the type of mum that if it goes on the altar, you leave it on the altar. So what happened here is that all animals that were brought up to the altar, you take them that while they're alive, you take them down. However, we're talking about an animal that has a mum. And according to Rabbi Akiva, that says that if it went up on the altar, you don't take it down. What we're trying to say is that when does Rabbi Akiva say that? That's only after it was slaughtered. But while it's alive, if it goes up on the altar, even though you won't be able to bring it back up because it has a mum, you still take it down. You follow this? So there is a chiddush here. Even though by taking it off the altar, you're not going to be able to bring it back on. And if it would have been slaughtered, you would have left it on the altar. But here, because it's alive, you have to take it off the altar. It's only after it's slaughtered that you would put it on.
Only because there's a mum.
Yeah, in other words, many sacrifices that have a problem with them. If they're put on the altar, you leave them up there. You don't take it off. You don't remove it from the altar. It's like a shameful to take it off the altar. If it has a mum, the sages held that you take it off the altar. A blemish. Rabbi Akiva held that you don't. Rabbi Akiva held a certain type of blemish you don't. That's a blemish in the eyelid. The reason why Rabbi Akiva holds that, we'll see later, is because by a bird it's not considered a blemish. So because in certain sacrifices it's not a blemish, so in other sacrifices, if it has it, you leave it there. Now,
interesting that you would learn from a bird to other sacrifices.
Yeah. We did this with Rabbi Yehuda. We said that certain cases, remember yesterday, certain cases, because it's good because it's valid in certain cases, so we won't say b'di'eved in other cases that you have to remove it. So here what we're saying is that if it had a live animal that had this blemish that was put on the altar, and if I take it off the altar, I won't be able to bring it back on. So I could have thought that I should have slaughtered it on the altar, because Rabbi Akiva holds that it should remain on the altar if with such a small blemish. But nevertheless, because it's alive, I take it down. So that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. That's what we're looking for, a chiddush.
Are you putting a live, something live there because you're going to shecht it up there? What are you putting a live? There's no sacrifice that you offer alive.
No. You would have done the whole service up there, but no, we take it down. And once you take it down, now you can't bring it back up because it has this blemish. Okay. But Mayu Kimta, how did you just establish this Mishnah? You said b'psulim, that we're talking about an animal that has a blemish. Ema Seifa. Let's say the end of the Mishnah. And so too an oila that goes up alive to the top of the altar, terid. You bring it off the altar. Let's say you brought it up alive on top of the altar, and shachta b'reishim mizbeach. You slaughter it on top of the altar, and he slaughtered it on top of the altar, which was not what he was supposed to do. So what do you do then? Yafshit v'yanatech b'mkaima. You skin it, and you cut it up into pieces on the top of the altar.
Wow.
Now, if we're dealing with an animal that had a blemish, so I know that it stays on the altar, but you don't do the whole ceremony of cutting it up and all of that. You just burn it. You just burn it as it is. You don't have You don't have to go through the whole process because it was invalid. You don't take it off because it's shameful. But you don't have to do all the cutting up and all of that. Vi psula, if the Mishnah is talking about this chiddush, that we're talking about an animal that didn't have that really should not be on the altar because it has the slit in the eye. So why does it say that if you an oila that was brought up and it was slaughtered there, that you cut it up, you skin it and you cut it up? You shouldn't be cutting it up. Are you going to skin it and cut it up? We learn from a verse that when is it cut into the segments, into the different parts, that's only if it's kosher, psula, and not when it's invalid. So we're questioning the way we've just translated the Mishnah, that it's dealing with an invalid sacrifice. The Gemara responds, Seif anasan l'kshera. The end of the Mishnah is discussing a kosher animal. The middle of the Mishnah, the beginning of the Mishnah, is talking about an invalid animal that was brought on the altar and it had the cut in the eye. You have to take it off anyway. But the end of the Mishnah is talking about a kosher animal, that you cut it up on the altar. So what's the chiddush here? That you can cut it and skin it on the top of the altar. That's a chiddush. But there's one opinion that holds that you're not allowed to skin it and cut it up on top of the altar. According to him, what's the chiddush? According to him, what are we going to say that this is? I don't know. Another question. What's the chiddush? He holds that you're not allowed to do this. How's it going to explain that all of this is done on the top of the altar? Because he would say that you have to take it down. We're talking about an animal that was slaughtered on top of the altar, yes, and the blood was sprinkled, and before it was cut up, it was still valid, but now it became invalid. Something went wrong. Maybe the thoughts by sprinkling the blood, something went wrong with it. So now, if you would take it off the altar, you won't be able to bring it back up, because once it comes down, it doesn't go back up. So we're talking about here that it needs to stay on top of the altar. And we're going according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon the Amar, once the blood is sprinkled, and it has a moment that it was eligible to be burnt, then yafshitena va'ira l'kayanim. You skin it in the skin, the leather, the hide goes to the kayanim. So therefore, because it became invalid on top of the altar, you don't take it off, even according to the opinion that holds that you're not supposed to skin an animal on top of the altar. Here they would agree that it's better to do it on top than to take it off and not be able to bring it back up. Ve'ela diktani, rather what was taught, keitzadoisa, this is taught in a Tosefta. What should you do with this animal that's on top of the altar? It gives the instructions of what to do for the sacrifice. It says you take the innards off the altar, you bring them down, madichan, you have to wash them out. The intestines and all of the stomachs, you have to wash them out to clean them from the waste. Lamali, if we're dealing with an invalid animal, so why do you have to rinse them out? You're not bringing them back up on the altar. So heichi navid. What should he do? Nakaveh b'pritayu? Should you offer the sacrifice together with the waste? Hakaveh no lepechasecha? Would you offer this to your minister, to your officer, to God? You can't do this. Would he be satisfied, or if you would offer this to a human person? Wow. The animal with the waste inside.
Shabbos meal. Right?
What is that?
Shabbos meal.
It's like sarcastic.
Yeah, it's sarcastic. Yeah. It's a quote from the prophet.
Oh.
From Malachi.
Yeah.
They're complaining about people bringing sacrifices that were of lesser quality. They were bringing the worst ones, saying like, "Look, I gave the sacrifice." Okay, Anan Hachi Kamrin. The Gemara answers that of course you can't bring an animal with its You can't bring an animal with its waste. Our question was Madichan Amali. Why do you have to clean it out? The answer is the Misrami Kayan Achrina, because let's say another Kayan will come. But Yadan, he doesn't know that it has a blemish. Naskina will bring it up on the altar. And so therefore it needs to be cleaned out just in case another Kayan is going to make a mistake and bring it on the altar. The Gemara asks, do you want us to go ahead and do something that could actually cause a Kayan to stumble? We have it now cleaned out innards that may go up on the altar without when they shouldn't be because they had there was a blemish in it. The Gemara says it's better that it should be like that rather than just to leave them. And this was a sacrifice, and just to leave it there together with the waste in it, looking like a dead carcass, that's not appropriate. So therefore, it's better for us to wash it out, and then if someone would bring it up, at least it won't have the waste in it, even though we shouldn't be doing that. Okay. Amar Rab Chia Barabba. Rab Chia Barabba says, "Boy Rabbi Yochanan." Rabbi Yochanan has a question. It's interesting. He has it as a question. Ula gave a statement about this already. The limbs of a lesser sacrifice, of a sacrifice that's of secondary holiness, of lighter holiness, that was brought on the altar before the blood was sprinkled. Yardu, do you take them off the altar because they didn't reach the level of holiness yet because the blood wasn't sprinkled? Or do you leave it on the altar? Do you not take it down? Amalei Rabami. Rabami says to him, why don't you ask, does it have mi'ila? In other words, the fact that it was brought on the altar maybe takes the place of sprinkling the blood. And now, what happens after the blood is sprinkled on a sacrifice of lesser holiness? At that moment, when the blood is sprinkled, the animal, all the parts of the animal, are raised up to a level of holiness that it belongs to the temple, belongs to this, that if someone would have personal benefit from it, he would violate the laws of Me'ilah. Because before that, it doesn't have that status. But now that the blood's sprinkled, it all becomes full sacrifice, and you can't have personal benefit from it. So